Hi, today we're going to talk about how many busy and remote buyers of London property often start their purchase thinking it's going to be very straightforward and scrolling on property portals for London property, and then discovering a bit further down the road that the process of buying a property in London is anything but straightforward and easy. It can even be complex and costly. And that's why I want to talk about some of the costly pitfalls uh, that are common and how to best avoid them, and how someone like myself as a property buyer can avoid them. So, the London property buying process really has its own language, traditions, and also hidden costs sometimes. So, terms like leasehold, freehold, ground rent, service charge, you'll see them in every property listing. And it's important to know what they are and where to avoid high costs to make the purchase as good as possible for a long-term hold, and so that you don't lose money in the process. And I do find that often it's even more difficult for overseas buyers who might not be familiar with the UK property buying process called conveyancing, because these terms are completely new to them. And in the countries where they live, for example, in Sweden, it's done very simply with estate agents checking everything online via identification. It's very, very different in the UK. Some would say more clunky and old-fashioned, and I'm sure AI will change everything with time, but we're not quite there yet. So, for those buying a property for an adult child who may be living in London and the parents may be buying for them and living abroad, it is often even more complicated and stressful because it's harder to know about which areas are good, and it's just an even more costly venture due to the higher transaction charges. And I heard just recently this week of a lady who told me about overseas parents who bought a property for their adult child studying at university in London, and they got it completely wrong in the wrong area that was maybe hard to know if you were an overseas buyer, and maybe the packaging looked good, that it was refurbished, but the area was totally wrong. And the result is that the adult child is depressed, socially isolated, and due to the high transaction costs, it's a mistake you really want to avoid, buying in the wrong area. So, this is where a professional buying agent like myself can be invaluable, and you really getting the support to buy from beginning to end, and you get the local knowledge and experience and sometimes wisdom from a UK-based professional helping you to navigate the purchase from the beginning to end. And certainly, as a someone who's lived in Sweden for a large part of her life, I can also help to translate what's normal in Sweden and to help to interpret what is suitable in Britain and how things are different. So the common mistakes and pitfalls that remote buyers often overlook, I'm going to talk about these now and how I can help to get these right. So, first of all, the biggest expense and maybe the biggest area where I can really help to add value is to not overpay at purchase. And it's very easy to rely on online asking prices and even online descriptions, such as floor plans, which might not be correct. And asking prices can have absolutely no relation to what a property is truly worth. And I help my clients to analyze the properties correctly using market comparables, but also the absolute latest market data that I have access to and I purchase for that particular area and for that particular size of property, to help to construct an offer that is really really good and helps to present the buyer in the best possible light. And often this very well written offer is then sent to the seller because the agent finds it so helpful. And so it's actually used to help to negotiate the price down, and it helps to achieve a great outcome for all parties, because often the seller has just know what they've been told from the estate agent, and so it's helpful for them also to know what the true facts are. So that's probably the biggest, one of the biggest areas. Secondly, buyers need to be aware of stamp duty charges when they buy a property. And if you are an overseas buyer, then there is a higher stamp duty land tax, which is currently 2% on top of standard rates. Um, and getting the stamp duty right is actually the responsibility of the buyer. And while the solicitor can ask questions, getting it wrong or right is the buyer's responsibility. And this is where having some extra support to ensure that you are getting it right and not wrong, like Angela Rayner did, late Deputy Prime Minister, which became an incredibly costly venture for her and her reputation. So this is where I can help to ensure that you are getting it right. And also by lowering it in a correct way. If you are buying for a UK resident child or someone who will become UK resident, then the stamp duty may be uh, much cheaper. And of course, getting that tax advice right, I can provide the right tax advisors, which are FCA regulated, to make sure that it's totally correct. Another area to get right is the legal aspect and the conveyancing fees. So, conveyancing is the British word, the legal word for purchasing a property using legal professionals and solicitors. And this is where it's really important that you do get a high quality legal representation. And I help to introduce you to law firms who will do a great job. But one thing I have discovered is that many law firms nearly systemize adding on costs throughout the journey. And sometimes those costs are unwarranted, and I'd say higher than they should be. But once you've started job to work with a legal counsel, you're sort of stuck with them. And that can be quite annoying when more and more fees are added onto the bill. Knowing that this is the case, I work hard to ensure upfront that my clients do get the right legal representation, which is also cost effective. And while, of course, costs can change during the process due to unexpected aspects happening, we don't want to work with law firms where it's systemized to add costs for clients. And this can often be a point of vulnerability for remote and busy buyers who only see the initial lower cost, not knowing that uh, tons more will be added later. Service charges and ground rent is a very important aspect when you are buying a property. This is really how much you're paying for the maintenance of the building in terms of annual service charges, and ground rent is what you pay to the freeholder. And that can vary hugely. And I always recommend to my clients to avoid buildings where the service charges are too high, because you might not actually be getting the services, and it might be that the freeholder is profiting unnecessarily or using suppliers who are charging too high fees. And it can make the property really hard to sell at the other end. And the same thing applies to ground rent, especially there is something called rising ground rents, where the deeds specify that leaseholders need to be paying an increased ground rent, which rises over time. And that is something that lenders really look out for, and it makes the property much harder to sell and can actually make it lose its value over time. And as we know, time flies much more quickly than we think. So you don't want to be buying something bad. And that is what I can help you to avoid. So buying a property in London can be stressful, overwhelming, complicated, and indeed even unexpectedly costly, but it need not be like that. I specialize in helping busy and remote, often overseas investors to buy a property here in London. And one of the areas of particular speciality is if they have a child living here in the country and they're looking to help to find them a better home so that they avoid renting. And I very much hope that I might be able to help you or any friend or family member who you think might benefit from my services. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Bye.